that fucking car. I didn't go upstairs when we were dropped off at Tamar's. You were sitting on his lap in that goddamn Uber with your ass kissing. So I hopped into my stupid car and drove home. All right, and I was really uncomfortable. Isolation is insignificant. Given the situation, it's command. Walked upstairs with you is Mandy's and his best friend. I'm not sure if someone is guiding the night's flow or making sure they are close. Additionally, as Funky narrates it, of going home carelessly and falling starts to sound staged rather than natural. The discount is cumulative rather than abrupt. He describes how he frequently saw Tamar and Mendeecees together at filming a song video. In circumstances when boundaries were blurred, acknowledges unequivocally that he was never at ease with their relationship, not because of rumors, but rather because of what he saw in front of him, and once more refrains from making accusations. He lists the dots by the thin chin reached its climax by the time they're in the car returning to Tamar's house. Here, Funky doesn't speak. He doesn't embellish. He gives an explanation for not going upstairs in a single terrible punishment. Funky clarifies that he didn't go upstairs because Tamar and Mendeecees were kissing in the car at that same, which because up until that point, the public discourse whether Funky had abandoned a friend, whether he had failed to protect her, whether his negligence was suggested by absence. However, his reasoning completely reverses the story. Didn't depart since he wasn't concerned. He thought they wanted privacy, so he departed. And that belief is important itself. Depiction of perplexity and seclusion. The point is made clear by Funky's account. Tamar, not emotionally, and not physically, he said, because it's precise. The image says she was sitting on Mendeecees' lap, and the appropriateness is not debated. They argue over whether it might coexist with the assertion that they transpired afterward. At that point, the starts to break down. Commenters cease inquiring as to, after being wronged by Funky, Tamar began to wonder there why their presence hadn't been acknowledged. What transpired upstairs is not. He mentions who went. He takes care not to. According to Funky, upstairs with his companion, as it introduces the precise moment, Tamar later recounts injury, blood, and a reluctance to call an ambulance. That line becomes the axis around which the rest of the discourse revolves. Funky re-examines their assertions, challenging their coherence rather than making fun of them. He remembers Tamar telling him that she nearly died when she woke up in a pool of blood. Contrasts that with her acknowledgement that she turned down a suggestion to summon emergency services. Funky asks Tamar why she declined an ambulance after saying she was on the verge of death. It is not implied that nothing occurred. It's that the individual who experienced it didn't handle it like an emergency. And that discrepancy encourages conjecture not because Funky creates it. Open the internet starts adding interpretations to this portion of the monologue as it spreads. Viewers draw attention to the gaps, the lack of an explanation for the injuries, the quick recovery, the subsequent weird references, names in Tamar's account combined with Funky's inaccuracy. And in that void, ideas arise as attempts to address cognitive dissonance rather than as realities. This is where the public language of the title starts to emerge, areas not from the text itself, but rather from the reactions of those who read it. Comment sections and reposts contain references to health tests and worst-case scenarios. These are always presented as assertions rather than verifications. Funky never says those things. However, they have a surface to adhere to thanks to his meticulous rest. The Yandy is the target of pressure instead of only Tamar near the end of his story. Funky mentions her. According to Funky, Yandy was the only one harmed. Another line of inquiry is set off by just one sentence. Because someone close to Yandy would have crossed a line if she had been wronged. And if that line was of mysterious injuries, redirected plans, and concealment, starts to resemble containment more than dignity. The dissolution of certainty marks the end of Section 1. Funky doesn't make any criminal claims, are not confirmed by him. He doesn't explain what transpired upstairs. His actions are stable. He determines who was present and who subsequently said they had no idea. Finally, the story no longer any one person after those coordinates are established. It is a part of the internet discussion shifts from being about emotion. Once Funky has finished outlining who, what, and when, tone and delivery are no longer points of contention among viewers. Start isolating discrepancies, not brand new ones. The same unresolved issues that Tamar first brought out, now presented in a more negative way. Her own admission that she didn't know what had happened, her public account of the blood and injuries, and her own refusal admission to use emergency services. Funky doesn't contribute any of that. He just won't allow such specifics to exist without repercussions. The atmosphere surrounding Tamar's condition darkens at this point. It's because nothing has been made clear. Not because of any new information. The interview she conducted provided a crisis without a reason and vulnerability without an explanation. That ambiguity becomes explosive in a setting already inflamed by Funky's tale. Commenters start going back to the words she spoke. She recalled returning home, wiping her face, and then losing consciousness, framing the night as something that occurred to her rather than something she took part in. The lack of a transition between those times tells its own tale. And that's where rumors start to circulate. When someone publicly reports serious harm, it's a reaction rather than an allegation, but continues to be unsure of its source. The stillness is filled with audiences. At first, they don't do it with malice. They act in this way because people want coherence. Additionally, they put on their own when it isn't provided. Funky's transcript does not contain the term test confirmed. It appears in reaction clips, stitched videos, and comment areas. It is always presented as something heard, seen, or said somewhere else. Viewers purportedly qualify it on several occasions. Blogs claim that people are saying, but repetition gives weight. As those comments spread, they start to attach themselves retroactively to the time frame Funky stated. Not as evidence, but as pressure. Tamar's silence intensifies the pressure as it increases. She doesn't describe the specifics of her wounds. She doesn't clarify the difference between saying you nearly died and turning down an ambulance. She doesn't explain why, in the presence of others. She maintains that she doesn't know what happened. The internet is seldom kind to empty space, and every omission turns into a space for interpretation. What Funky's insistence that the story was written alters the course of that. He doesn't claim that Tamar misrepresented how hurt she was. Confusion, he claims. That distinction is important. Without naming the result, it implies intention. Additionally, audiences begin searching for motive as soon as they infer intention. At that point, Yandi's name becomes Yandandi instead of Yandi. I'll end it there. Going straight forward. Being incidental. When Funky says that she is the only one who has been harmed, it silently explodes. The focus of the entire affair from harm to treachery. Someone close to Yandi went too far if she was harmed. Health and concealment become inextricably linked if that border was crossed on the same night, which Tamar subsequently characterized as painful. This is where the second clause of the title starts to take hold. Yandi's revelations don't allude to a public speech or press conference. It illustrates how viewers understand quiet under duress. Supporters start speculating that Yandi is privy to anything she knows. That disclosure is not required if this issue has come up in familial, legal, or protective conversations. Public to be comprehensive. Online users start reinterpreting Yandi's absence as containment rather than avoidance. They surmise that the information being suppressed isn't for the audience's advantage, but in order to survive, because it fits with the pattern of conduct. that belief spreads. People's decisions about what to say, what not to say, and when to back off in the transcript. And it's not because Funky brings up legal processes that the word court enters the conversation after that framework takes hold. He doesn't. But his language reflects the known concept of testimony. He tells the story in chronological order. He creates unease and discusses choices. He repeats some words for accuracy rather than emphasis. The cadence is to remarks made under duress, not for amusement but for documentation. From then, conjecture turns into imagined outcomes. Commenters start speculating about the involvement of legal counsel, strategic nature of silence, and the purposeful avoidance of specific language. This is all unconfirmed. However, the tone of the transcript encourages it. When combined with Funky's reluctance to dramatize his stubbornness to back down, gives the sense that he thinks his story will stand up to scrutiny. Is in fact, Tamar's illness is no longer. It is explored in relation to exposure and potential beneficiaries of ambiguity. The focus of the health narrative shifts from sympathy to confinement. Viewers wonder why injuries are but their causes are kept a secret, why only some clarity is provided, and why details are omitted when emotion is expressed. The supposition establishes a courtroom in the comment area by interrogating rather than accusing. Mendes takes center stage in that made-up space. Not due to Funky accuses him of misconduct, but only because he puts him in the center of closeness. Presence turns into implication. It's relevancy, not guilt. Furthermore, relevance is sufficient to draw attention. The phrase court breaks out at this point. Before it becomes literal, this becomes metaphorical. It depicts the point at which viewers begin to prosecute the narrative conversually rather than passively consume it. Timelines are broken down by threads. Videos halt at specific phrases. Parts where Funky's tone shifts are replayed by users. It ultimately comes down to one unsolved paradox, where Tamar's responses soften and assurance turns into evasion. How someone can disclose severe injury in public while remaining completely unsure of its cause, particularly in the presence of others. The plot becomes less under Tamar's control the longer that question remains unresolved. It ceases to be her story to a group inquiry, one driven by unresolved testimony rather than fresh evidence. The narrative has changed by the end of this stage. The question of whether Tamar was harmed is no longer relevant. It concerns the reasons behind the lack of clarity. The question of whether Funky was messy is no longer relevant. It's about why her account breaks while neatly. And gossip is no longer an issue. It's about what happens when specificity and stillness collide. Because the audience doesn't wait for authorization to do so after that collision, make judgments. They build them, all right? Additionally, they do so loudly that even the most subdued gatherings are drawn into the commotion. The story stops questioning what happened at the end of Section 2. It asks who can afford to remain silent. The plot stops advancing on fresh information by the time it reaches this stage, inward. What was spoken is not what the audience starts analyzing. It explains why it's never mentioned at all. When the drama is removed from Funky's story, a strict structure remains. Discomfort, presence, and disappearance. Harrison, Tamar's story is still up in the air, and that uncertainty becomes the center of gravity the longer it is left unchecked. Perception hardens at this point. Viewers start to see that Tamar stays away from anchors in his language. She doesn't specify when the situation changed. She doesn't identify those in the vicinity. She doesn't explain how she transitioned from a convivial night to what she's. The room does not immediately erupt. It gets tighter. A moment before continuing. It's not the self-assured kind. Rather, it's the kind where how much harm they're willing to take after speaking. Do you know what actually occurred to you? No, I'm not. Or what are you able to discuss? Can discuss it, but I have no idea what actually occurs. He says that after lowering his tone and settling his shoulders, which is that he's not sure how to react to Tamar. Most viewers fail to notice that hesitation because what what comes next is correction rather than rumors. Tamar was on camera moments before, composed, providing shelter through uncertainty. She gives a quiet if she is aware of what actually occurred to her. Distance, not accusation or denial. Tamar claims she has no idea what actually occurred to her. Innocence is not heard on the internet. It picks up on omissions. And Funky hears something quite different. His response doesn't start out loud. It's under control. He ignores portions of the interview, jumps forward, and then turns straight to the camera. As someone who was present, not as a pundit, someone whose name is already being mentioned in comment areas that he did not request to participate in. When he accuses her of lying, it's not as funny as a punchline. Like a crack. Funky accuses Tamar outright of lying about that evening. Clips begin to circulate within minutes. Users go back. Screenshots are shared. Threads grow in number. Viewers start piecing things together. A birthday celebration that wasn't quite a party. Injuries that were publicly detailed but never clarified, and a night that constantly shifts depending on who is telling it. Funky then moves the frame. He doesn't dispute emotions. Restaurants, transportation, and who showed up, who sat where, without warning. Who didn't go upstairs and who did. And you were a bold-faced person when he did so, because I'm telling you straight to your face. Goddamn bald-headed liar. All right, explains his failure to pursue Tamar into her own home. The temperature decreases. Funky claims he went home because Tamar and Mendeecees were sharing a kiss in the car. At that point, the internet begins to monitor movement rather than debate tone. Because misunderstanding is no longer a part of the narrative. It has to do with closeness. It concerns silence and the reasons behind someone's assertion that they are unaware of what transpired, while declining an ambulance. It's depicting blood and allowing conjecture to consume everyone in their vicinity. Make a comment about his homeboy. All right, so this is the third time that you and I have hung together. Mendeecees appears out of nowhere. All right, you can now tell her whatever comes up in the comments. Some stand up for Tamar, while others support Funky. But nearly everyone observes the same thing. There is one name that keeps coming up. One line won't go away, and one person hasn't said anything. I didn't drive my car over the sauce if anyone knows what happened above. Zoe calls and says, Tamar said, just leave your car at her house and we're going to V12. By the time I grabbed the exhaust, I didn't even want to go see him. And once that realization sets in, this becomes far more hazardous than a messy fallout. Because the internet doesn't wait for explanations when stories don't add up. It creates pressure. Funky then slows down the narrative until it is no longer able to conceal itself. He doesn't follow Tamar's feelings or make assumptions about her motivations. He breaks down the time frame she presented and substitutes a logistically sound one. Where they went, who called whom, and the actual course of the evening. The speech is methodical and quiet. It indicates that there won't be a reaction. It's memory. And that distinction is important because Tamar's hesitation starts to appear more like insulation than bewilderment. As soon as he reframes the night, he begins by categorically denying the basis of her interview, the birthday party story, the notion that her giving to her companion was the focal point of the evening. Funky claims that this framing is not only erroneous but also deliberate. He clarifies that Tamar and Zoe phoned him in search of a place to dine because everything around was closed, and that he recommended Ruth's Chris as a last resort. The evening started off as a convenience rather than an occasion. Kay and that particular aspect weakens the emotional weight that is later attached to it right away. The first coincidence then occurs. It is not at all a coincidence, according to one Funky Mendeecees, and a companion enter as soon as he gets there. It is not dramatized by Key. He makes no accusations. Key simply points out that this wasn't the first instance, right? Okay. Funky observes Mendeecees' unexpected appearance during several hangouts where the temperature is altered by a single observation. I didn't play it during the interview, but you mentioned that you nearly died when you woke up in a pool of blood. You indicated in this interview with L'Oreal that you were at home with David or someone else when they said, we need to call the ambulance. You responded, no, because plausibility is eliminated by repetition. 1 unexpected appearance may be the result of chance. 3 begins to resemble a pattern, and Funky lets the audience figure it out on their own. The night